Hi, everybody. Hey, do yourself a favor. Take a drive on a little gravel road here in the county. The trees are changing every day. The changing of the leaves is kind of a treat from nature. And I've got a treat for you tonight with devotions. Last week, I gave you a taste of exegetical Bible study, which is kind of hard. Very helpful. But I've got something for you today, another type of Bible study that's my favorite type of Bible study that would teach you more, faster, easier, with less effort. Hey, how would you like to be able to memorize the bulk of Scripture? Well, in just a moment, I'll show you how. But before, I want to say that this is a short midweek devotion from the Littleton United Methodist Church. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is. There aren't many exceptions to that, but I may have one exception to that today for you. Very simple, doesn't take much training. Download a, um, a Bible, a Bible version that is audio, and just listen to Scripture. Listen to Scripture when you first get up. Set aside a little bit of time each day to listen to Scripture. Listen to Scripture while you drive your car. Listen to Scripture whenever you can. I tend to go through, I just listen a little bit each day, and I'll go through a whole version of the Bible, and then I'll go to another version of the Bible, and then another version of the Bible, which is partially why I can't seem to quote anything anymore without it being a hybrid of versions. But it'll do wonders. And it's almost like passive learning. If you don't take my word for it, which is probably a good thing, let me give you 3 or 4 reasons why listening to Scripture is, I think, probably one of the best ways to study it. Number 1, back when Scripture was written, there were no computers, there were no bound books, there was no movable font printing press. There were whatever was written down. That's why a lot of the books in the Bible were so short, because every word mattered. And usually everybody didn't have a copy of all of it. They would listen to it being read. They would memorize the Psalms. And so when you were listening to a passage of Scripture being read, that's the way it was designed for us to listen to it, to learn from it. Okay. Number 2, there's a lot of big words in Scripture and a lot of names that are hard to pronounce. And sometimes when you are reading through it, you kind of stumble over those names and you try to pronounce them and you lose track of the whole thing of what's going on. You just get focused on that word or that idea or something that is unusual and pronouncing it. And now if somebody else is reading it, you can pick up the whole context. Which brings me to number 3. Context. I mentioned when we were studying exegetical Bible study last time, the last devotion that I had, that context matters. And if you are listening to someone read maybe 5, 6 chapters in a row of scripture and you're just sitting there listening to it or doing other things while it's going on, you aren't focusing so much on little snippets of sentences, little clauses. You're hearing it, the whole context of it, which makes it a little easier to digest. And here, number 4, and this is probably the biggest for me, is that we learn differently when we hear than when we read. Okay, let me give you an example. How many speeches have you heard over your lifetime, or have you read over your lifetime that you can quote? I realized one day that I can pretty much quote the wedding ceremony because I've done it so many times. But there really aren't that many. How many songs can you sing and know the words to? How hard was it to learn the poetry or the speeches that you memorized, maybe Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, as opposed to how easy it was to learn the lyrics to the songs you liked? Well, the same thing starts to happen when you listen to scripture. And I don't mean just listen a little bit here and then all of a sudden you have it, but you listen to it over and over and over again. You find yourself starting to realize, starting to be aware of where you are in scripture, what's been happening, and what's about to happen. Just like maybe a favorite movie on TV, or a favorite movie in the theaters, or maybe you're watching something like Star Wars or something, and you just know what's coming next. Because we've learned it in a different way. Now this sounds fantastic, and I'm not going to say I can do this anymore at all. But when my kids were little, and I would just listen to scripture while commuting and driving back and forth every day over and over, and when my mind was a little sharper than it is today, we had this game on trips where the kids in the back seat would pick a Bible verse and they would try to find something obscure, and the goal was for them to trip me up. And they could read one verse, and then I had to tell them, plus or minus a chapter, exactly where it was they read it in scripture. You know, like from a chapter before to a chapter afterwards, I had like that 3-chapter wiggle room. And most of the time I won the game. Well, it wasn't because I'm sharp. It was because I was just listening to those words over and over again. And I was getting a feel for, oh, you're back in 1 Kings, or you're up in, you're up in Timothy right now. I could kind of get that feel from just hearing it over and over again. So if there's anything I could say to help encourage you pick up scripture, maybe it's just listen to it. Listening to it gives you the context and the overall feel of it, and you can see what's coming, and you just sort of memorize it. Exegesis gives you the meaning for it, helps you build solid doctrine. It's not one or the other. Both of those are tools that will help you a lot over the years. Well, that being said, let me just say, may God bless you this week. May God watch over you this week. May His word find its way into your heart this week. And as you travel, may you see the beauty of God's handiwork in all of the fall.